Now we're going to go into something that's going to be a little bit more laughable. So I hope you're ready to laugh. Vivek Ramaswamy apparently now has a podcast. So he was a presidential candidate. He decided to drop out of the GOP primary and decided to put all of his support behind former presidential candidate Donald Trump. But apparently he has also started a podcast. And one of the people that he decided to interview was Coulter. Now, I haven't seen Ann do any interviews in a while. I've always considered her to be more of a caricature or something. Like, I just feel like this woman is acting. Like, she never came across as like real to me. That's just the impression that I got. But this interview in particular is getting a lot of heat, ladies and gentlemen, because of some of the things that Coulter said, beginning with the very beginning of the interview. And it tells you something about Vivek Ramaswamy, which I tried to warn people about when he was running for office. It tells you where he stands. Shout out to Simon Atiba, who actually captured this. Oh, man, get some popcorn for this, folks.
Oh, and I agreed with many, many things you said during, in fact, probably more than most other candidates when you were running for president. But I still would not have voted for you because you're an Indian. There is a core national identity.
Let's go back. This is one of the controversial remarks that Coulter made. Robbie said, anthrax cult face. Damn. Damn. Okay, here we go.
Oh, and I agreed with many, many things you said during, in fact, probably more than most other candidates when you were running for president. But I still would not have voted for you because you're an Indian.
So, boy, I tell you. So she says she wouldn't have voted for Vivek Ramaswamy, not because she didn't agree with his policies or his platform, but simply because he's an Indian. Where do you go from there, folks? Her sole reason for not supporting him, simply because he's an Indian. That's it. And for Vivek Ramaswamy to sit there and continue to entertain this conversation in such a way as if she didn't just smack him in his face. What does that tell you about Vivek Ramaswamy? It gets crazier.
Is a core national identity that is the identity of the WASP. And that doesn't mean we can't take anyone else in, a Sri Lankan or a Japanese or an Indian. But the core around which the nation's values are formed is the WASP. We've never had a president who didn't have at least partial English ancestry. Never.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's an interesting tour through that historical lane, but I want to pick on one point you said, which is citizenship, right? Let's talk about what does it mean to be a citizen of a nation?
So Vivek thinks that's an interesting point, what she made. Like, you know, and I want people to know, like, people like Coulter, they make these types of comments, these controversial comments, so that they can get attention. She's been able to make a lot of money off of making controversial comments. That's kind of what she's known for. But for him to just sit there kind of like, that's interesting. It's just, really? Vivek Ramaswamy, are you that desperate to fit in with that type of group, the Ann Coulter type of group? Are you that desperate to fit in with that type of group that you are just going to overlook what she just said about you to your face, that she simply would not vote for you, not because of your policies, but because you are an Indian? Are you willing to do that? Couldn't have been me.
It's interesting. If a lot of people trip up on this, they'll say, well, it means what you get, right? Do I get to vote or do I get some other claim? And that doesn't really work. Actually, if you look through most of American history, for example, women were citizens long before women could vote, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's not about what you get. In my book, and I think that this is true with the American conception of citizenship, I think it's true of the Roman conception of citizenship, is it's about your loyalty, actually.
Yes.
To whom do you actually pledge loyalty? And so I think you and I share that in common, actually. I don't know, I've never asked you this, Ann, but I assume from seeing the things you said, tell me if I'm right about this, you're probably against the existence of dual citizenship as a concept. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yes. You and I share that in common.
Outrageous.
It's incoherent. It's not just outrageous. It's incoherent. It's oxymoronic. How could you possibly have a loyalty to two different nations where the essence of citizenship is which nation to whom you had your undivided loyalty? That's what the essence of citizenship is all about. So you and I agree on so much there. But where I wouldn't say lose you, but I may fail to fully understand you, is on that axis of citizenship, what does ethnicity have to do with the matter? And I think you would be well served, and maybe this could be a great platform for you to do it, to make the case for why that, what you put at WASP basis for the American identity, how is that relevant against a backdrop of which you got the WASP seventh generation descendant of some rich guy on the Upper East Side in Brooklyn that pretends to hate this country because it's the cool thing to do, versus somebody who came here as the kid of immigrants, but pledges loyalty to this country? If loyalty was the axis for citizenship, aren't you actually committing a bit of a sin, reverting back to a conception of citizenship that has nothing to do with loyalty in the first place?
Thank you, Notori. Notori said, bitch, you're not white. That's what she's saying. Exactly. To your face. I can't even say she said it behind his back. She said it to his face. She let you know just how little she thinks of you to your face. Now, in reference to the dual citizenship, what's interesting about that is that she seems to have no problem supporting politicians that have dual citizenship to Israel. And there are many politicians in Congress that have dual citizenship to Israel. Thank you, JB. Yes, for those who are not aware, WASP means White Anglo-Saxon Protestant, which doesn't include Catholics, by the way, for those of you that are Catholic.
Well, I will say many of those seventh generations WASP I definitely hate. I know we have a lot of really, really bad ones, but like I said, anyone can adopt this. I guess what I just said, if any of your children marry a DAR, I would definitely vote for them for president. It's not so much, it's more, president is different. You have to be natural born, as you know, which, by the way, Ted Cruz is not, basically because of what you were just describing. Where is the loyalty? So ambassadors' children born actually in the United States are not natural born, but that's a total sidebar. I've gotten
It's actually not a sidebar at all. I mean, the fact that ambassadors' kids born in the United States are not citizens is actually an overlooked fact. If a kid of an ambassador from Mexico does not enjoy birthright citizenship, neither does somebody who's in this country illegally.
Yes.
Birthright citizenship either, right? So that's actually a quite important logical chain. But I go back to, forget even because you get to this constitutional, legalistic, and I like that stuff, but we'll just put that to one side for a second. But the essence of American identity, I think there's a part of you that believes, I think you basically said so, that part of that identity is tied to a certain Anglo-Saxon heritage of this country, and that you're more American if you've vested into that over the course of generations that are descended from that, rather than somebody who came here with a civic commitment to the country, went through the naturalization process, and then their kids may, in some real sense of the word, and the reason I respect you is that you actually have the, so to speak, the stones to be able to say it, is.
So technically, then that would mean that people who are descendants of slaves in this country, according to her, would not be a part of that landscape. And what's sad about this is that Vivek Ramaswamy plays right into this. He's totally fine with what she's saying. And this is where we go back to the phrase people of color. It's not just Vivek. We've seen it with Sagar and Jetty. We talked about this earlier this week. where it seems like for like Vivek, it is more important to him to have the acceptance of people like Ann Coulter, who will say these racist rhetoric right to his face. It's more important for him to have the acceptance of people like Ann than to have the acceptance of other people of color in this country, like descendants of slaves who built this country. That's what it seems like. That you would let her disrespect you to your face. And I'm not saying he has to scream or yell at her, but I sure as hell wouldn't have just let that slide the way that he did. But that's why she's on the show.
That you think that there's a difference in the status of the Americanness of that person. And that's where I think I disagree with you, but I want to give you the opportunity to air the case for that strand of national identity that I think we ought to just smoke out and be able to have a discussion about.
Well, the reason I mentioned the natural born citizen is I'm only talking about president of the United States. So obviously the framers thought there was something different about being president, the one man who holds one entire branch of government in his hands. It isn't to say anything about who could be a Supreme Court justice, and they have a little more power than the president, by the way, or secretary of state or governor, or obviously senator or any other position, but president, and I guess by extension, vice president. That is something that the framers did think was so important that you had this deep generation-wide loyalty. And why would they think that? Well, as many said at the time, freedom is a wonderful thing, but it's a very hard thing to learn. And one of the things, and I cite these polls in my book, Adios America, it's striking and depressing that lots of our very best immigrants just do not understand the Second Amendment. They do not get the First Amendment. And you take polls of them, you know, should you have a right to bear arms? Should hate speech be banned? And it's noticeable that large percentages of immigrants and children of immigrants really don't get that. And I think that is the point of having natural born citizen only for president, that this is a really delicate thing we have, this freedom to bear arms and there being no such thing as hate speech. And it's just an additional little safeguard.
So let me just pause here for a second. First of all, I want to give a shout out to B. B said cheap ass background. I don't know what that is. I saw her background earlier and I was kind of surprised considering, you know, she's the type of status that she's at. I mean, she makes a lot more money than I do. I was kind of surprised that was her background. B called it out. That was really interesting. But one thing I want to say here again is that Vivek was born in the United States. His parents immigrated to the US, but he was born in the United States. He grew up in Ohio. So he's not, I mean, he's a citizen. He didn't achieve citizenship later on. He was born in the United States. This is one of those questions that came up during his presidency before, where people were, you know, saying, oh, well, he wasn't born here. No, he was born here. So it's really interesting that part isn't being mentioned.
Here's my question for you on that is, because the left is actually very good at using what I call proxy logic. I reject proxy logic, but the left is actually very good at this. They'll say we need diversity in a corporate institution. So we're going to select for diversity of thought, not by screening candidates for the diversity of their thoughts, but by screening them for the diversity of their skin color, which is a really curious thing. If you care about diversity of thought in a boardroom, why do you care about diversity of shades of melanin or the diversity of your X or Y chromosomes? You could have a room full of people that look really similar to one another and think very differently, or a room full of people that look really different and think the same, which is much of what you get in corporate America today. So that's what I call reasoning by proxy, where one of the things I've often said to the left is if you want to select for diversity of thought, screen candidates for the diversity of their thoughts. If you want to select for diversity of experience, screen candidates for the diversity of their experiences. That might be a better way of achieving your stated goal than to use the logic of proxy. So again, the Constitution.
So one thing I want to add here, which people like people that mention this and they like to leave this out, it's not just about skin color. You know, like I've worked at certain places like MIT, for example, where it was largely male. It's not so much anymore the way it used to be. But at one point in time, it was like all male. right? So if you go there now, you would not think that. But where women were actually considered, and still are in employment in the United States, women are also a part of affirmative action. And this is why I've explained this before on the show. If you look at when it comes to employment, white women actually benefit from affirmative action the most. That's not my opinion. You look up the numbers, you'll see this for yourself when it comes to employment. So it's not just, oh, well, people are making these decisions based on someone's skin color. It's not just about skin color. It's also about gender. That is another thing. And if you go to some of these institutions, if you go to like MIT, if you go to Caltech, if you go to some of these institutions, the tech industry in general, which for years they have been trying to recruit more women to come to the tech industry. For the most part, it's very much bro, like for real. You go to like some of these tech companies, you walk in, there's like a foosball table, there's a keg in the corner, there's everything that you need there, like to have fun, everything that you need to keep you there working. Think about that. So, but yeah, it is heavily male. So there have been other actions and other efforts to also recruit more women in technology and also in STEM as well. There's been initiatives that have been pushed forward for that. So it's not just about people are just focusing on skin color. And that's something that I feel like people like Vivek and people like Bill Ackman does this as well. They leave that out. Now, Bill Ackman's wife was a professor at MIT. So as much as he pushed back on DEI, his wife could also be considered a DEI hire at MIT because she was a female. Someone let Bill know that. Let's move on.
Questions to aside, I think we're talking about a cultural matter relating to national identity. My question for you is, I worry that you may, I say this respectfully, maybe making some of the same category error that our friends on the left make to say that, yes, it is shameful that immigrants and kids of immigrants often have no idea what the heck the Bill of Rights is actually about. That the Second Amendment exists not to protect some guy who wants to go sport hunting, but it's the one amendment that puts the teeth in all of the other ones. These are basic concepts that many immigrants, first-generation Americans, and for that matter, I can say it from having gone to school with many of the waspy varieties that populate places like Harvard too, where I've gone, goes for any sixth or seventh generation American too. It's shameful, the level of civic absence of knowledge, a black hole of understanding of the history of our country. And I guess my question for you is, why solve for that through what I would argue is a pretty poor proxy, whether or not you're talking about a safeguard? If there could be a safeguard to ensure that you have leaders in this country or citizens of this country that have a better understanding of that, I would love that safeguard. I personally believe that every high school senior should have to be able to pass a basic civics test, the one we ask immigrants to pass, before becoming a voting citizen of this country. Before you cast that ballot in a ballot box, you better darn know what branch of government the president leads. And yet, you actually have more people who would fail the test that naturalized citizens are likely to pass who aren't even naturalized citizens.
I learned that in school. I noticed this is something he mentioned over and over on the campaign trail, but I learned that in school. When I was in, middle school, high school, we learned about the executive branch, the legislative branch. We learned about judicial, we learned about all three branches of government. I'm really confused. So, but you guys will have to tell me because it has been a long time. But is this no longer a thing? Is this no longer a thing? Are they no longer teaching civics in schools? Because it was required. It was not even a choice, for me, right? So I always find that interesting.
Why not solve for the actual target that you and I both care about, which is loyalty and an understanding of what you're actually pledging loyalty to, rather than using what I would argue is a left-like false proxy target that you use to solve for the same thing?
It isn't really true that the seventh generation WASPs are voting worse than the immigrants. One of the problems with the immigrants we've been taking in, actually probably any immigrant, but definitely 90% of legal immigrants come from the third world. They're used to authoritarian governments. They block votes. And every 4 years, I have to hear about how, no, I think we're going to take the Hispanic vote this year. I think we're going to get the Asian vote. No, you're not Republicans. Every election is decided by slight movements of the white vote. Now, the fact that the white vote is that close Yeah, okay, I hate 50% of them, but they're the ones who change their mind and look at the different candidates. It's much more easy to boss around people who have come from an authoritarian culture. And yes, take your point that this is, at least for this one position, president, you are looking at something other than just what the person actually believes. But nobody really knows what a person actually believes. So why not have a fail safe? I want to hear you say it. And I'd also be more comfortable if you're third generation and have some English or, British blood in you.
Yeah. So it just like that happened. And it's like, she'll say stuff like that. And then she'll say things like, let me show you something else. This is why I say, I feel like she's an act. Like, I feel like Ann Coulter is an actress, right? So let me show you something else that she said. We'll go into that, and then I'll show you how Vivek actually responded to criticism of this interview that he had with her. This conversation here with Ann Coulter, this was uploaded to YouTube 11 years ago when she was on ABC News.
You made kind of a provocative comment in your book.
Think about what she just said to Vivek and listen to what she said 11 years ago.
You made kind of a provocative comment in your new book here, Mugged, and I think it's on page 151. You write that various groups, feminists, gay rights groups, and those who are defending immigrants have commandeered the Black civil rights experience. Yes. What do you mean by that?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that, because I think it's one of the most important points of the book. I mean, I think the way liberals have treated Blacks like children, and many of their policies have been harmful to Blacks. At least they got the beneficiary group right. We do have to, we shouldn't. There is the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow laws. We don't owe the homeless. We don't owe feminists. We don't owe women who are desirous of having abortions, but or gays who want to get married to one another. That's what civil rights has become for much of the left. They dropped the Blacks after 5 minutes.
Immigrant rights are not civil rights?
No, I think civil rights are for Blacks.
See, this is essentially the problem. And the Republic.
So you guys hear this? So this is conversation. And there's Robert Reich. He was on this panel as well. So notice how she was talking about civil rights are for Black people. So it's like, sometimes she'll say something that's pretty based. And then sometimes you're like, whoa, like what are you talking about? Right. And then she'll say something that sounds very racist. So it's just like, it just feels like an act to me.
Can I just say, what have we done to the immigrants? We owe Black people something. We have a legacy of slavery. Immigrants haven't even been in this country.
But you see, most of us are either immigrants or are the descendants of immigrants. And we understand that not everybody, there are Native Americans in, but we understand in this country, that kind of self-deportation, making things so difficult for immigrants, for undocumented immigrants, that they have to leave. Or the DREAM Act, threatening to veto the DREAM Act, which is what Romney has said. And again, we have Governor Romney, who is basically taking a position that is anti a large and the fastest growing segment of the electorate.
And here's the thing, if Republicans don't do something with immigration, and if Republicans are so far away from Latinos, they're going to lose not only this election, they might lose the White House for generations.
The future.
And Texas to turn
that's why the Democrats are dropping the Blacks and moving on to the Hispanics, because they're a larger group of Hispanics now. But could I just say to Jorge, I hate to disagree with you when you're attacking President Obama, but I think the point on immigration is you can have open borders or you can have a welfare state. You cannot have both.
What was interesting about that conversation is that, of course, she was sitting right next to Robert Reich, who is the liberal. And when she brought up the part about, descendants of slave are owed something in this country, notice how Robert Reich didn't say anything about that. Very interesting, huh? He was, no, let's go back to focusing on immigration. He didn't say anything about what's owed to descendants of slavery. That was interesting. Vivek obviously getting a lot of criticism for this interview. He said, here's a crazy thought. I believe in having respectful conversations with people I disagree with on the left and the right. It's ironic to see this coming from Ted Lieu, who didn't say a peep about Black on Asian violence during the pandemic. Was that weakness or fear? Probably both. So you see how this is something I noticed with him, Vivek. He always want to bring up black people. He always want to mention us. It would just be like random moments. Like, why are you bringing us up in this, man? Like, what are you talking about? He always finds a reason to mention black people. Now, Ted Lieu is a clown too. So you know this, right? Ted Lieu, another weak Democrat. I wasn't surprised by Ann Coulter made a racist statement about Vivek. What surprised me is the weakness and lack of self-respect of Vivek Ramaswamy. He's actually promoting this episode and praising the person who spewed raw racism to his face. I feel sorry for Vivek, but don't get it twisted, because Ted Lieu is no hero, champion, and no freedom fighter either. I mean, he's just another establishment Democrat politician. You know, he goes along with the wars as well, too. So it's not like he's no freedom fighter coming forward. And this is what Vivek said here. He said, Ann Coulter told me flat out to my face that she couldn't vote for me because you're an Indian, even though she agreed with me more than most other candidates. I disagree with her, but respect she had the guts to speak her mind. It was a riveting hour. The Truth Podcast is back. So, yeah, what a crazy time we're living in, ladies and gentlemen.